We need to turn nuclear into a product that delivers a service. Don't worry about the tech.
The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
Richard Deakin, welcome to Titans of Nuclear.
Absolute pleasure. Been a while, I think. We've been trying to do this for what, about 9 months now, maybe? Seems
well,
a while,
ever since we met in the UK, and I was super excited to talk to you. That was at the North Business Cluster Energy.
Hey, let's give a shout out to those guys. The British Energy Coast Business Cluster, Northwest Nuclear Arc, International Forum, Reach Out Forum. Really innovative kind of stuff and a good organisation. Love working with them.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. But this podcast is about you. And so I would love to dig back all the way to the beginning and find out how you even learned about nuclear and energy and got excited to begin with.
Okay. So let's, I'll try and put my educated UK newsreader voice on, but that's going to be a little difficult here, Bret, because what people might realise listening to the podcast is that I'm very much from the north of the UK. Yeah. So I kind of grew up in the coalfields in the north of the UK, kind of around South Yorkshire, Sheffield, the heavy industry area. Yeah,
Sheffield. Yeah, it's got a storied past with coal.
Absolutely. And my father and my brother were both underground coal miners, so deep mining. Yeah. So the joke I often make, just to keep some brevity into this, is I thought I was kind of the son of a panda till I was about 15. Because he would roll home from work with little black rings around his eyes with the coal dust and the grit and the grime. Really dirty, really hazardous, dangerous industry. Okay. So around the time I was getting into my late teens, there was a bit of an industrial kind of shift in the UK around the price of coal, and it wasn't economic, and there was a lot of industrial unrest. Cutting a long story short, the last thing my father wanted me to do was work in the coal industry.
Yeah, I bet.
And because the coal industry was threatened, it was shutting down. We lost nearly 200,000 people in that industry over sort of 18 months, 2 years. Right at the time, I was going into further education. Now, further education in the UK is essentially degree education. Yeah. So then what happens is I kind of fell into nuclear by accident. Yeah, I went in to do metallurgy at Sheffield University, which, to be honest, studying metals in Sheffield is probably not a bad thing to do. Really high quality tutors, great industrial base around there, heritage of special steel making and alloys and all that kind of thing. Great. And the course was 4 years. Yeah. So thinking kind of strategically, the reason the course was 4 years is you had 2 little blocks of work experience, 6 months on one placement, 6 months in an industrial site on another placement. And for no good reason I could think of other than it got me far enough away from my parents to have a social life. Yeah, because Sheffield's not that far from South Yorkshire and I wanted to spread my wings a little. I actually ended up working for the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authority at Harwell. Around 20 years of age, and I did a research project on void swelling or nuclear radiation damage just in stainless steels. I actually had a paper published in an international journal. Okay.
And so that ties in directly to your studies of metallurgy, right? Because this is essentially what you were looking into was after a material is subject to radiation, how do its properties change? And I guess the properties that you care about are strength and how brittle it might be, because this affects like how the system stays together, right?
Yeah, strength, how brittle it might be. Also, its dimensional shape. Unsurprisingly, when you put a metal in front of a radiation source that's high enough intensity, you do some damage on one side of it, in relative to the other. So the thing actually swells on one side, or it changes shape. Yeah, and that's caused by neutrons effectively knocking atoms out of the lattice. You get little voids in the lattice in the material, and then they come together, form a gas bubble, a neutron-induced void. You get enough of those in an area, the thing actually swells and expands, preferentially down one side.
Yeah.
Kind of very techy, yeah? Yeah. But, so that was kind of nuclear, and it was really cool because I got to play with high-tech equipment like electron microscopes, because you had to do a lot of that stuff in research, as a research background for 6 or 7 months. Great stuff, yeah.
It's so interesting because everyone that I meet in nuclear, it's almost like they're more than just an engineer. They're like a super engineer because they also have to be a little like part physicist at the exact same time. Whereas like, your normal, I was just a normal mechanical engineer. Yeah, we were doing like, okay, this beam deflects at this distance, but like you have to understand, the physics of the materials as well.
Yeah, so my, I, weirdly enough, so then my next place, so then I will go back into Sheffield, which is great. And of course, I'm the only guy in the university and the student population who understands how to use these really high-tech material, these high-tech instruments, because I've just been practicing them on things at that time that were costing £400,000 or £500,000 to buy, big microscopes. And I'm the guy that's using the one in the lab kind of thing. Hey, that's good. So that was quite a cute trick in hindsight, and that's the key lesson here. You learn things in hindsight,
Yeah. But for you you like set yourself apart even at a young age. Like you went out and you got this experience. I mean, not everyone in your cohort gets to work with this type of equipment, puts themselves in that situation. I mean, is this something that that like even earlier on in life you knew that you had to set yourself apart? You had to like go the extra mile?
So so just before I did my further education, when I went to Sheffield, there's a qualification, or there was at that time and still is in the UK, called A level, like an advanced level, pre-grading to go into further education or college education, as you might describe it in the States. Yeah. In my area of the country, we had something called a sixth form college. So you did your schooling years, then you went for 2 years into an intermediate college environment, which was a little bit like prep school for university. Lots of free time on the curriculum, afternoons for doing lab tests, all that kind of stuff. Now, mea culpa, I made a complete mess of that. Because at 16, like most other guys, I was fairly distracted in other things. Sports, we'll say sports, yeah.
We'll say sports.
But I very quickly learned, and I came out of that and thought, well, now when I go into further education, I'm going to keep looking a year ahead and think, how do I maximize the opportunity, or how do I get strategic about what I want? Nobody knows at 20 odd years of age what they want to do, Bret,
Yeah.
So but I think you should know where you want to be in, say, a year's time and what you could get out of a year. I think that's reasonable. Yeah. And that would be one of my top tips that I always say to the young grads and people that I talk to. Don't try and look too far ahead. Get as much breadth as you can early, but don't just turn up and expect to acquire it. Turn up and know what you want in the first year of the job, and then see where it takes you. That makes sense? Yeah.
It's interesting because I bet that, we're only early into our conversation, but I bet this is going to be a theme, this idea of you kind of looking forward, planning ahead, seeing, trying to anticipate what the future holds. But please continue. Yeah,
in kind of short bursts. So one of the things I'll come back to is I'm not really techie. As we get into the conversation, you'll see I'm kind of much more people focused, I think, but everybody says that, but I genuinely believe it, So then I do a little placement, a second placement, which is working for, at that time, one of the big generating boards, the utilities in the UK. So it's a nationalised industry at that time. And there was another power station miners' strike, which was great. Yeah. So I was doing metallurgy, doing insurance claims, and basically analysing machine failures on power stations, because you need to work out what's broken in them, get them back in service, and turn them around very quickly. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So I got kind of dipped into nuclear power stations. I saw some of the Welsh fleet, the Magnox stations. I went and worked in the big hydro station inside a mountain in Wales called Dinorwig. And again, I lived a strategic move. I lived just far enough away from home to work away and do the work stuff for 9 months, because this was over in Manchester in the northwest. So that, I was getting something out of the year kind of thing again. So I wasn't looking too far, I was just getting a year. Yeah. Now, by some amazing thing, I got what's called a first class honours degree, which was pretty good, which kind of says, well, you're not, well, the weird thing is I never really found it that difficult. And that's not meant to sound kind of the way it does. What I really did was, I remember travelling back for the final 6 months of my course before my exams, sitting on the train going, what is it I don't really feel comfortable with? I'm going to revise that, and I'm going to know that subject at least 3 or 4 times before I get through the 6 months. The stuff I'm good at, I'll sharpen the tool closer to the thing, Yeah. So kind of practice what you're not good at and think about what you're not good at and work on that. Yeah, and I did that, again, quite strategically. This theme about planning ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
And it became and it was almost, the day before I'm having my exams, I'm in the students' accommodation playing pool and having a beer, because I was kind of, I've done this, I've practiced it. It can only be what it can be now. Wasn't a stress thing for me,
Yeah.
So came out of that, got a first class degree, got a few job offers, and here's where I step into nuclear, because I've got nuclear on my CV and energy on my CV now, because I've done these 2 work experiences. I get offered a post in the technical department, or the tech development department of British Nuclear Fuels at a place called Springfields. Yeah. Now, for people outside the UK and the sector who don't know what Springfields is, it's essentially the home of UK nuclear fuel fabrication kind of since 1960. Okay. All the Magnox fuel in the UK and some into international markets like Japan, all the Magnox reactor fuel was made there. And all the oxide fuel for the AGR fleet was made there. And I think at least 1 reload for Sizewell was made there.
And AGR stands for Advanced Gas Reactor?
Yes. Yeah. Advanced Gas Reactor. Yeah. So I went there, same reason. And I went with some super talented people who are kind of icons of the industry in the UK. And my first boss is now Dame Lady Sue Iron, or Dame Sue Ian. ION.
Former Titan, yeah.
Yeah, lovely lady and great influence on my career, yeah. And the biggest influence on my career, after about 18 months, she said to me, look, Rich, you're really good at this technical stuff, but is it what you want to do? And I said, well, I'm doing it because I want to be good at my job, and I'm getting what I want to get from this. She said, yeah, but what about operations? Because you seem to like the rock and roll of the people stuff on the plants, yeah. So I then at that point went and had a little knock on the door of the works manager who kind of ran the oxide fuel area. So we were making 260 tons a year of oxide fuel for AGR and PWR at that time, and said, I'd like to be engaged in operations. Have you got a role I could do in the operations management team? Because I was coming out of my graduate training then, sort of 2 years in. Yeah. And he said, yeah, I guess because of Steve's recommendation, Steve Iron's recommendation.
Goes a long way.
Goes a long way. And I was appointed to be what was called an assistant plant manager, which is kind of offline, not line management, but doing pretty interesting stuff on one of the mainline oxide fuel plants. So I was, so what would have been? I would have been about 24 years of age then, and I was doing the blend recipes for the enrichments and powder blending for the AGR main lines. Yeah.
And blend recipes, essentially what you're doing is you are taking, I guess, batches of raw material, but at different enrichment levels. And you might have, let's say 4% enrichment here and 1% enrichment here. And by combining them in the right proportions, you end up at the perfect enrichment level as what the reactor needs to operate as, however it was here.
Absolutely. So essentially, if you think about most enriched oxide plants or enriched plants in fuel, they're either limited moderation, safe by shape, safe by mass, safe by moderation, or they got some burnable poisons. Yeah. Yep. So the safe by shape blend size up to around 5% or less than 5% ish was around 1.8 tonnes. Done in a safe by shape vessel, discharges into drums, and then you mix the drums with a second batch to get the perfect mix. Yeah. Interesting lesson on standardization here, which we'll come back to.
Yeah.
At that time, the AGR fleet, I think at that time was something like 11 reactors, 10 or 11 reactors, yeah. all slightly different because British engineers like making things a little bit better. Yeah.
I think all engineers
like making things a little better. Yeah. So all engineers like you make things. So all slightly different, all operating on kind of bespoke enrichment levels, depending on where you were in the core, and all operating in slightly different, therefore, designs and bundles of fuel. Yeah. So that meant the guys at the end of the production line, if you think about this as powder to granules to pellets to fuel rods to fuel bundles to station, if you think of that kind of as a value stream, progressively getting slightly less more and more complicated all the way to the end where you've got 20 or 30 variants of different fuel types going out.
Wow. So I guess I hadn't appreciated that level of differentiation. Normally when I think about how each power plant is different, I'm thinking, okay, like the pumps are different sizes, so the pipes are different sizes, and so your maintenance schedules are a little bit different. I never thought that something that you just think is standard, the fuel, could actually be different as well. And that would drive up fuel costs, which drives up operational costs, which makes your cost of power more expensive.
Yeah. So at this point, you start getting into the operations space of how do you make stuff well, and what is well? What's the value add in good operations? Let's put it like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So coincidentally, then, so I'm now into my kind of late 20s, around 26. The fuel division of British Nuclear Fuels, as it's called, the Springfield site. The guys running that realised that a change was coming in terms of the customers. So the UK electricity market was about to be broken into north and south boards and eventually be deregulated and all those kind of things, which fundamentally meant nuclear fuel had to be sort of 30% cheaper if it was going to survive in that market.
Wow.
So what do? We basically went through some really, really interesting times. So they tried to kickstart a just-in-time manufacturing program. Never asked me to.
What does that mean? You don't have inventory stockpiles?
Correct. Yeah, correct. So if you went into in most factories, Bret, or most industrial workplaces, and you said to a guy, "Okay, so you make TVs, yeah? If your livelihood depended on it, how fast could this factory make a TV?" And they'll go, "Well, you get the bits, you assemble the parts, you put the stuff on the boards." You assemble a kit of parts, you test it. Let's say, for argument's sake, 3 to 5 days. Yeah? And then you go, okay, so why is it taking 3 to 5 weeks? Yeah. And the answer is that in front of every operation, there's a store. Yeah? And that store's generally there to buffer against breakdown, a problem, lack of a worker. Yeah? It's to keep the workforce busy rather than productive. But there's an offset between keeping a workforce busy and producing the right things, because the cost of the inventory, particularly in high value parts like nuclear fuel, is huge. Yeah, is huge.
And so this essentially what you're describing is like the field of operational management, right? Like this is what the people who like study this are like trying to optimize and understand and look at the cost benefit trade-off analysis of.
Absolutely. It's supply chain management, it's value stream mapping, it's something called constraint theory, find the bottlenecks, work on that. So what happened? The management team decided this was something that needed to happen for obvious reasons. And we got a great opportunity. They took 3 assistant plant managers, I was one of the 3, and they said to us, "We're now going to promote you to plant manager because you're not used to running these plants, but actually that's okay because lots of people are. We want you to try things differently. So innovate."
A little bit of innovation, different thinking. Yeah.
So they just if you... I mean, this sounds brutal, and it certainly wasn't. So we got coaches and mentors of the existing plant managers. They kind of stepped aside. We stepped up. Yeah. And we used to say, I walked into a pellet plant and said, there's 2 weeks worth of pellet store over there, which is giving off radiation, background radiation. It's enriched. It's all stored in racks. What would happen if we took that out? And we just took it out. So it was a bit try and see at times.
Yeah.
Now, what really did happen is we had to get very good at actually fixing problems that we could previously live with. So we became very good at fixing breakdowns, because if you haven't got stocks to go to and you're stopping the line, you fix the breakdown and you do root cause analysis on the cause of stoppages. Yeah.
It forced you to uncover your weaknesses.
Exactly. And that happens with all just-in-time manufacturing plants, all reductions in inventory. You kind of get below the river's top and you start to see the rocks on the bed, and then you smooth the rocks on the bed out, and you actually don't need as much water to get down there, if that makes sense, and through it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that was great. Brilliant change management training, really good professional manufacturing training. And hey, we were pretty successful. We improved the quality. Well, we improved the productivity by about 25% over 3 years of the site. We reduced the inventory by a one-off hit the first year of 43 million sterling. Now, of course, just the financing charge on holding that inventory, not having to buy the thing,
Yeah.
And from a customer point of view, we went from a lead time of something like 2.5 years. So I order your fuel 2.5 years in advance to ordering it a maximum of 6 months in advance.
Yep.
So more flexible operations. Now that then drove us to things like, well, why do we really need 20 odd variants of fuel? Yeah. Does the marginal difference in the performance make that much difference when it's costing you this much to hold it, customer?
Fascinating.
Yeah, so you can drive. So it's a value stream approach. And the answer was no, we didn't. I think we got down to 6 or 7 variants at the end.
Wow.
Yeah, which meant we could change fuel on the lines every day if we had to, which took the inventory down. We didn't have to hold stocks. Yeah.
So they're almost like positive feedback effects, because you were able to do these things that allowed you to then make things cost effective enough to reduce the number of variants, even if you took a small efficiency hit down the line.
Yeah.
But then because you were able to reduce the number of variances, your processes became more efficient, which means that the cost of those variances were even lower, such that at the end of the day, you were still able to deliver a cheaper product, even with the smaller number of fuel types. Yeah.
So the key nugget there is look at the cost of delivery front to back and operations. It's not about the tech. I mean, nuclear fuel isn't. Well, I would say this because I made hundreds of thousands of tons of it. It ain't that complicated, It's basically a pellet in a tube surrounded by a moderator.
Hey, don't tell nuclear engineers that.
Yeah, I know, but it ain't that complicated, Although it's incredibly high spec, but it ain't that complicated, Yeah. And you've got to respect that the fuel is part of the safety case, so it has to be right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you look at it in terms of not the price of the fuel, you look at it in terms of the price of delivering the fuel end to end, including the operational cost. Yeah.
That's right.
So that was great.
Yeah,
that was great.
Looking at total systems cost rather than trying to optimize for each individual component.
Exactly. And that in my mind has been one of the problems with nuclear, in that it's progressively looked at technical gain in the reactor systems rather than overall cost of essentially just delivering power.
Yep.
We sell power. Our market is power. It's not nuclear tech. Yep.
And so, that's right. And so now this is amazing that we identified where in your career you actually learned that lesson, because this will definitely come up as we start talking about SMRs in the future.
Oh, absolutely. But
please proceed.
Okay, so at this point, somebody thinks I'm half decent at running fuel plants. And maybe I wasn't, and I was still young enough, because I'm in my early 30s, to be mobile. Mm-hmm. So I was asked to go to Sellafield, and I got involved in the mixed oxide business, MOX. So basically making nuclear fuel out of plutonium oxide and uranium oxide, and essentially for use in PWRs.
Sellafield is like the equivalent of the Hanford site in the U.S., where it's like a former weapons production facility, and this is like in the northwest part of England.
Well, yeah. So most of the UK facilities back in the deep mists of time had some connection to the UK military. Most nuclear sites do. Sellafield for a long time has been the centre of reprocessing in the UK, and waste storage in the UK. It was also the first commercial power station in terms of Calder Hall, Magnox Station in 1958. Where, by the way, we built 4 reactors and put them online in something like 3.5 years. But there you go. Something about standardization in campuses. Yeah.
And if we did that back then, before we even had computers, I think that shows us what is possible for today.
Correct. Yeah. So what you have at Sellafield, or what you had at Sellafield, a reprocessing facility that was essentially generating plutonium oxide. And then there's an interesting question: is the activity that's still latent in that material, is it a liability or is it an asset? Well, one of the mechanisms for closing the cycle was to recycle that, blend it with uranium, and put it into fuel assemblies and put it back to reactors, reactor fuel. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they built a plant there called the Sellafield MOX plant, which was designed to close the fuel loop, to do exactly that, build nuclear fuel out of those components. And again, through lots of other quirks of fate, not least of all, the plant wasn't particularly easy to operate. Not necessarily because the components of the engineering, but because of the way they were strung together in the system. So it wasn't particularly easy to operate, and it was failing to be commissioned, and they were really struggling. Yeah. I was appointed head of manufacturing at that facility and asked to get it to go with my team.
Wow.
Yeah.
A lot of responsibility.
Yeah, and lots of pressure. Shout out to the guys on MOX who will hear from this. There'll be a few who will listen to this, I'm sure, at some point. One of the best, most committed teams I've ever worked with. Just fabulous guys. Yeah. In a really difficult environment, under huge scrutiny, both politically, business-wise, customers, every interference you could possibly manage. Yeah. And one of my jobs as head of that business was to basically shield them from that and let them get on with their job. Yeah. So, pretty tough and interesting 18 months. So imagine you've got a facility that's cost at that point, about 725 million to build. Yeah. Everybody wants it to start making money and selling stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of pressure.
So you got to find how, you've got to work yourself to, well, what's the first thing you have to solve to get this thing moving forward? And when I picked up the business, we were surrounded by programs and planning. Yeah. So here's me doing my people thing, Bret. I said, you know what? I've got a team in there that's pretty beaten down. They need to win something. They need a success.
Yeah.
Let's go find a problem and fix it. And I'm not going to do any planning for 3 months because we just need to do something.
Yeah.
You don't need the full playbook when you've got to get to the first down. Yeah, in the UK.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow. Okay, so yes, this is almost like your engineering psychology now. Like people's morale, like it was a problem to be fixed, just like a component might be a problem to be fixed. Yeah.
So making nuclear stuff is just making stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Different hazards, different issues, different engineering sometimes. But fundamentally, it's about getting people with lots more skill than you to do the right thing at the right time and answer the right problem.
Yep.
So if you think about commissioning anything and commissioning a nuclear facility, the speed at which you commission is determined by a really simple cycle. How fast can you identify where the problem is? So have you got a good data collection system that works easily? Yeah. And I'll tell you what the first data collection system was in a minute, which is really quite funny. How fast can you, once you've got that data together, have you got the right sorts of people who can understand it and say, well, there's the issue. How fast can you find a potential solution, and then how fast can you trial and error and put it in place? Yeah. Now, in nuclear, the fourth bit of that, the trial and error and reinforce, tends to be the bit that gets tricky because you're into change management plans and you're into regulation and risk assessments and all that kind of stuff, yeah? But that's what you have to assemble, basically, a problem-solving team that can accelerate through that cycle. So you don't build an organization that's an engineering organization or a steady-state manufacturing organization. You build one that's fit for purpose for the challenge you've got at that time, whether it's innovation and problem-solving, whether it's steady-state ops, and you realize that through a lifetime of a program, you keep transitioning, yeah?
Yeah.
So we focused on little critical action teams where we put the best people into the best place. And it just quite literally said to the team leaders, who are the best guys who understand the technology in your area? And they went, Alan, Jeff, whatever, yeah. And we said, okay, you got them as Monday. What do you need? And they just said, just space, time, and we'll tell you what we need. I said, that's okay. Yeah. I then prohibited any senior managers from going in the plant. This is true, by the way. This is all true.
Yeah.
And that was because when people are under pressure, managers feel pressure like everybody does, and they want to be interested. They want to go and help. So they go, and the guys on the shop see people dressed in suits and ties and lab coats, and they go, well, he must be important. And you very soon lose accountability and control of who's actually calling the shots, and people just get confused. Yeah.
Wow.
And I wanted really, not command and control, but ownership of an issue. And it needed to be owned by the guys that could fix it. Yeah. The guys that can fix it on the issue, you as a manager or a leader own the responsibility to give them space to do that. And that's not, people often use the word facilitate and enable it in a bad way. You've got to do both. It's not just a one-way street. Yeah.
Yeah. You empowered them.
Yeah, exactly. And empowering is not just saying that's your job. That's your job, but I'll let you do that because this is a safe space you can operate in because these are the rules of the game. And if you haven't got what you need, either training, tooling, money, time, or equipment,
And I bet you that built long-term trust as well.
Well, we went from 0 to 4 fuel assemblies. Right first time, the certification data pack had approaching 500,000 data points in it. And we did it concession-free, build to print.
Wow.
In 18 months. So I think that's possibly one of the most certainly the most satisfying Saturday night party I ever had. And it was a really big thing in that area at the time, And here's the interesting thing about data and tech. So you think nuclear facilities, you could jump to, well, get me some improvement consultant who tells me how to do this. No. You got the guys on the shop and say, what's your problem? And they go, well, we have to keep putting our hands in that piece of equipment to adjust whatever every couple of minutes because it's not working. Okay. Let's put a flip chart in the room with a pen and just keep a track. And our key performance indicator for the next month is how many times you have to put your hands in there and intervene. And that was it. We started at that level.
And that's the data that you were tracking, that you were mentioning?
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The first month of my head of operations job, we tracked, and we used to get interventions per hour, or we actually it was interventions per minute when we started. We were running for something like 35 seconds. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, So good operational stuff.
You collected data, you identified the problems, you empowered the teams, and you got it done. That's amazing.
So key stuff there is process control, analyze data, simple solutions for simple problems at the time, get back into that. If you want to get things done and accelerate, good data, find the problem, ability to implement, and then embed it, and that's it. Dead simple stuff. What should be coming across by now, Bret, is I'm not a techie, even though I managed to get that good degree.
You say that, but you seem to approach all problems, even people problems, with that engineering mindset, with that pragmatic mindset. So you still feel like a techie to me.
Yeah, and I'll come back to a little personal thing at the end when we get time. Yeah, so that was great. So at that point, I was kind of doing all right. People thought I'd done okay to get this thing to move. So and I was looking around what next to do. Now I'm an operations making kind of guy as opposed to a reprocessing kind of guy or a big project management guy. A bit weird actually, because I developed into that a little later in my career. And it wasn't obvious for me what the next move in my career was at Sellafield. So I left. I decided I'd go get some external experience. And it really wasn't, what do I want to do in 5 years' time? I thought, I need to just do something different in a different sector. And I got asked to be a general manager, head of manufacturing for a site on Rolls-Royce Aerospace, which is in Derby. Okay. Very much in the news at the moment with the current crisis we've got going on, in terms of aerospace industry.
Yeah.
And I was asked to transition an old site to a new site within the aerospace network. So sitting and working in the supply chain management network, or as a supply unit manager, if you like, GM of a business that was delivering. Really, really stretching, challenge yourself. Go from a nuclear culture, which is hugely regulated, has a certain ethos to it, if you like, but all very different on different sites. Come back to that. And then step into an aerospace MRP2 driven systems, just in time kind of stuff. Really, really aggressive. Learned quite a lot there. Let's put it like that personally. Yeah.
I bet.
A lot about dispersed supply chains, much more about supply chain management, external. Yeah.
Right, because there's thousands or tens of thousands of components that come together for these complex aerospace systems.
Yeah. And the basic issue is that everybody in that chain has to be working in some sort of synchronized system. So you're minimizing inventory. Yeah. Nobody's held up. Your quality's right, Interestingly, same focus on quality. If your quality's not right, you can never be assured that you can actually deliver on time, because you're just not sure, are you? Unless you hold unless you call inventory to buffer your poor quality, to mask that issue, you've kind of got to get good systems on quality. You've got to be assured that your product's good. That's not to say what goes out the door isn't always good and assured. It always is. But what you can't afford to do is get to the final packaging area and go, oh, crikey, that's not quite right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, because at that point you're in deep trouble and you're letting a customer down. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was great. I then so I did that for a few years, but kind of I'd got too much nuclear background, and I was quite rare in Rolls-Royce at that time. Mm-hmm. And Rolls-Royce has a division which designs, builds, and services nuclear reactor cores for the UK Navy.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was offered the role of general manager and agent of the site licensee in Rolls, which basically says you're the man accountable for running a nuclear licensed site, and the business, and that's a weird position because the regulator likes to know in the UK who's in charge of the operational decisions. Yeah, the license holder might be the board, the legal entity, but you're the single point that's running the show. Yeah. That can be quite nerve-wracking or quite interesting, whichever way you look at it. Very rewarding. Very rewarding. I did that for 5 years.
Yeah, but at this point, I think everyone had realized that every new challenge that you got thrown into, you kind of took head on, applied these same principles, and came out successful. So you were essentially a trusted entity at this point, whenever there's a high stakes operation involved. Yeah,
I've kind of had what I've described in my career. I think my LinkedIn profile says something like, in most careers you're lucky if you get one or two really significant things that you have to solve and fit. I think I've done it about 3 or 4 times now. I keep getting these problem children and being given the opportunity to work with good people to try and fix them, if that makes sense.
Well, let's use this as an opportunity to fast forward a little bit to the challenges that you're taking on now. It's no small feat to try to revitalize the entire commercial nuclear power sector for a country.
Well, that's not a bad way of putting it. I'm not sure it's all my rep. At least I hope to God it's not.
So, hey, listen, everyone should go in thinking, listen, it's my responsibility. If I don't do it, nobody else will.
I think I'd like to take ownership for quite a lot of it. I'm certainly going to give it a good try. Yeah.
Okay. So what's your organization? Yeah.
Well, we'll just come back to that point. Yeah. Go on. No, you asked me the question. Sorry.
I was just going to say. So, what organization? I want to make sure that we got time to talk about, what you're working on now and the future and the future of your country. In the nuclear industry. So tell us, what role are you at now? How did you come into this most recent role, and what are the challenges that you're trying to take on?
Okay, so really quickly, after my 5 years in Rolls, I went out to work for NuScale Power in Oregon. I was their program director for their first of a kind engineering and validation effort. Yeah. So one of 2 program directors. Fabulous place, great demographic, really innovative organization, trying hard. And doing some great stuff, and a great personal experience because West Coast, again, another one of these. I'll take a punt. What could possibly go wrong? I'll go and work in the US for a couple of years. The worst thing that can happen is I'm going to have a good time and learn how to surf.
Yeah.
So I did it, and it was great, and I learned a lot. And I'm still consider myself to have done a good job there, and I like those guys. We get on. Came back into the UK and joined the UK government as a policy advisor within BEIS, the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. advising UK government and ministers on what's needed to bring forward the commercialisation of small nuclear in the UK.
And had this just recently become of interest to the UK government? Or like, how did the UK government decide that this was an important thing, specifically small nuclear reactors?
Interestingly, I think to some extent it came down to optionality, long-term optionality. I don't think there were, by no means has the UK government been sold on small nuclear reactors in its entirety for a long time. And it comes down to the economics, as it always does. It's always about the cost. So in 2014 they ran a competition called the SMR. The SMR competition, lots of people who would listen to this would know about it. Essentially, there was the intent was to try and down select what small nuclear technology offered the best value for money as a proposition for investment and progression by the UK. What it actually did is it looked at small nuclear and compared it on a like-for-like basis with large generation programs and said, well, actually, just economies of scale, that doesn't work if all things are equal. And that's true. That's true because of the cost of the capital and the infrastructure. But actually, what's not true is that all things aren't equal. There's clearly, intuitively, a very different risk profile to delivering something that's factory built. In a controlled environment. Back to my little story around 400,000 or 500,000 data points on 4 fuel assemblies right first time. To something that's built in the field as a project. So the fundamental difference here between gigawatt energy and large infrastructure projects and small nuclear is we're now talking about developing a product, not projects. So that's a fundamental difference.
And what's important there, because if you were to look on paper, just what the engineers estimate that a system might cost, and then you were to divide it by the number of gigawatts or megawatts that it produces, and look at the price. Okay, so you, on paper you might look at the two and you might say, okay, you build it bigger, it's clearly producing electricity at a lower rate, but then that doesn't take into account the risk premium that whoever is giving you your capital to build it might charge.
Exactly.
Or the fact that something might go wrong and then you got to actually pay out different entities over time. That actually is like a hidden cost that you have to put on the big project. And then if you were to relook at your two projects with that hidden cost attached, actually the smaller projects might be more competitive.
Absolutely. So in 2018 in Bays, we commissioned a piece of work a group of people called the Expert Finance Working Group, which was led by and chaired by a lady by the name of Fiona Riley. And what we took 6 or 7 independent experts from the City of London, because the City of London's pretty good on project financing, and said, you know nothing about nuclear. Our supposition is we think we can attract commercial finance to small nuclear programs. Do you agree? And what we actually did, we had 8 or 9 small nuclear vendors submit. They came and they were interviewed and gave presentations to the panel. And we got themes emerging. And a few themes emerging. One was the financial community didn't understand the risk profile of nuclear, particularly small nuclear, because nuclear is nuclear, and hey, it must be financially risky because it seems to take a long time and it's very expensive,
Right.
And small nuclear can be different because it's factory built, therefore you should be able to assure the build durations. It's smaller orders of magnitude of capital. You should therefore, once you've proven that it's a different delivery model, you should be able to get to a place where you can borrow the money to build a plant at a very different rate, in due course. So my analogy here, back to the product versus project time, when Ford, bless him, in 1908 in Michigan, decided he wanted to make the first Model T, and the first one was made, I think, in September 1908, it wasn't about the internal combustion engine, it was about the method of manufacturing factory build.
Oh my God, perfect analogy. Analogy.
And by the way, in 1927, less than 2 decades later, the 15th million came off the end of the line, and you guys were all driving them, and they were cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's what we need to do in small nuclear. We need to turn nuclear into a product that delivers a service. Don't worry about the tech.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, there will be step changes in tech and evolution along the way because we get into different markets and different applications. You know, not all cars are still Model Ts. Some are 4-wheel drive, some are sports cars, but essentially they're all made the same way. The supply chains are similar. And the things that underpin the chassis and the front end specs are all components that are all similar. So you've got competition to supply the tires, for instance. You know, the wheels. Yeah.
Yep.
So you build an industry and you build a market. Yeah. So that's the analogy I use a lot. We're not about the tech. We're about the method of manufacturing the supply chain. Yeah. So did that. I did that for a couple of years, and then through that process, Bayes decided that it wanted to support, at least explore, the development of a UK SMR technology. Mm-hmm. So in July of 2019, we got to a place where we were delivering. We got to a place where the UK government decided it would co-fund or match fund the first phase of an UK SMR program.
Okay.
So £18 million of UK government money in the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund portfolio, which basically is a series of programs run by an organisation called UK Research and Innovation, which is to enable development and delivery of significant projects that might affect societal challenges like clean growth. Yeah? So we co-funded 18 million of government money, 18 million of investment money. That's phase one. Yeah. They needed a program director to run that. So I left government and I'm now the UK Challenge Program Director for the Low Cost Nuclear Challenge. Yeah.
Wow.
And the mission is to de-risk the R&D, and it's mainly the development part in my eyes, of a small nuclear delivery model to the point at which commercial and private financiers, the risk profile is such that we can be attracted to this at competitive rates and we can go on and deploy. Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. So we're kind of building a supply chain. If that makes sense? Yeah. So challenges are interesting. And there's, so challenges in this are interesting because it's all about the risk profile. So the question is, if you're thinking around what's needed to deliver low-cost nuclear, you start with the cost driver and the economics. So you look at all the component parts that might actually reduce the lead time in a factory, reduce the cost of construction on the site, reduce the cost of borrowing the money. So that becomes confidence in government policy, confidence in the engineering and technical innovation, confidence in the delivery programs, confidence in the ability to access a site, and confidence that the supply chain can deliver in the broadest sense. Yeah.
And then who takes this and delivers it?
So the current program, if it goes forward, will be slightly in excess of 500 million sterling. Yeah. And it will take the maturity of design and the supply chain development and the underpinning innovations to a point where you're pretty sure they're going to be deliverable, up to a point where they've gone through the generic design assessment in the UK, stage 3.
But is this private nuclear developers that are applying for this money, or how does it actually work?
So Rolls-Royce, with a consortium of partners, and I'll talk to a little bit around the partners in a second, came forward and bid into the Industrial Strategy Fund and said, we've got a program that we believe can attract a private developer to select our technology and build on a site if we can get to the point where it's de-risked and they're confident it will go ahead. Yeah? So the funding, the match funding to the 235 million that government will put in is provided by Rolls-Royce, its consortia partners, and private funding.
And so that advances the design, and then at that point,
not just the design, Bret. Not just the design. It advances the design. It advances progress towards site allocation. It advances development of the supply chain. Yeah. And it advances the policy narrative and the commercial frameworks for that point. The real value of the program is it's putting a project dynamic and forcing issues to be answered and addressed on a project timescale. Because we want to deploy these things certainly no later than 2030 and preferably 2 or 3 years earlier than that, if possible. Yeah. So it's forcing these things to be addressed and answered to move on. Yeah.
Yep.
So I actually think that's the biggest value of the program.
And then in the meantime, as this is all being advanced, are you also pulling in stakeholders, let's say from the EPC and construction industry and just infrastructure development companies, such that when all of these building blocks are in place, they've worked with you, they know you, and they're just ready to roar, and they're each like, okay, I'm going to build.
Yeah. So I said a consortium led by Rolls-Royce. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what the Rolls guys did, and again, they've presented this in many public forums, so I can say this. They essentially looked at all the above and below the line on the cost calculation. What are all the things that drive the cost of power? Yeah. And what are all the things that, what are all the above the line, what's all below the line, so you get to your pound per megawatt hour. What's your output underneath the line? What's your costs above? Yeah. And interestingly, you get to things like, which is no surprise, I guess, to people on here, the cost of construction. Okay, who's really good at innovative construction? We need a construction partner. So they went searching for a construction partner, not necessarily skilled in nuclear, but actually skilled in innovative construction and modular construction, for example. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What drives things like the cost of operations? Well, fuel's kind of down in the low-hanging fruit. It's low, but things like data analysis and fleet impacts, yeah. So they wanted really good artificial intelligence and data systems. So they went to look for people in the sector or outside the sector that could work for them on sort of computer-controlled, remote operations, diagnostics, those kind of things. Yeah, mm-hmm. So there's innovation there. They went looking for who are the best guys at doing the manufacturing techniques that might sit in the center of the reactor island. Nuclear Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre in Sheffield, Welding Institute down in Cambridge. So they've assembled all the parts already to deliver a small nuclear power station. It's not about the design in the middle.
Yeah.
So they've taken a very cost-driven, market-driven view of this. Right from day one, requirements-driven. Yeah. They don't make any decision, or we don't make any decision on the program that we think drives the cost in the wrong direction, which is interesting for the engineers because it kind of puts them in a constrained place, but wasn't cost always a requirement? Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of been where we're at now. I guess in due course, we'll see where that gets us to. We're in phase one. Phase one was about firming up cost estimates. We've already seen utility partners stepping forward and wanting to engage with this. We've already seen private investment funds from other sectors, because of course decarbonisation and having greener portfolios of investment is now important. Now stepping forward as they're awakening to the possibility, So it's kind of in the round.
Now I know that the consortium is comprised of UK industry and UK partners. What if there are international partners that want to get involved? Like, what if I, as a financier from the US, want to get involved in the result of your work in the UK to help actually get a project to fruition? Is that allowed? How does that work?
Yes, it is. So what will happen at some point, we anticipate, at the moment it's a loose consortium. Well, loose is the wrong word. It's a consortium of partners that very much operate to an integrated program within their own capability sets. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In due course, when everybody's confident that it's the right thing to do, which is nearing time, actually, it will be within, I think, the next 3 to 6 months, maybe, if not quicker than that even. We'll step into the next phase of the program. Yeah. So I mentioned 36 million match funded. So there's around 200 million pounds still to shoot at on this program, and we step into that next phase when we're confident. Yeah. At that point, a special purpose vehicle or a joint venture will form. Yeah. Which will be, I anticipate, Rolls-Royce led with their partners, and equity players can step into that and say, you know, I'm interested in this, and begin that engagement through Rolls. Yep. But we are seeing quite a lot of interest, unsurprisingly. Yeah. In this, particularly in current times, very relevant. Yeah.
And so maybe let's take a little bit of time to ponder, what this means for the future of UK. Because energy obviously is a big issue. Cost of energy is a big issue in the UK. Energy security is important.
Yeah.
New manufacturing, especially given the current political relationship with Europe, building up a new manufacturing sector is important.
Yeah.
And I didn't even mention climate targets and clean air and revitalizing old electric infrastructure. You got to replace old electric infrastructure as well. It just seems to me so many points that your approach might hit upon for the future of the UK as a whole. Can you maybe talk about as we wrap up here, about what this does for the future of your country?
Yeah, sure. So it's, we're the first country to legislate for a net zero target. And that's not just in energy, that's the whole economy. Yeah. Which means you can do some carbon capture stuff, so there are mechanisms you can do there. So there's a whole bundle of things can play into that. But fundamentally, your power generation needs to be of a lot lower carbon intensity than it is today. And the UK has actually done quite well. In base power generation in terms of decarbonisation. I think we've gone from around 235 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour to somewhere around, I think looking at today, you'd be about 128, 130 across the last kind of 5 to 8 years, kind of quite a steep glide profile. But that's all being on, if you like, on-grid power, yeah? So, we routinely go now for several days, if not a few weeks, with zero fossil power stations on here. We've got a few gas-fired stations that come in and out, and we don't run coal or oil anymore, or very rarely. Yeah. That withstanding, to get to net zero by 2050, we're going to need to, probably most analysts would say, and there's plenty of stuff in public domain here, double our overall delivery to the grid, or energy delivery, or energy generation. And it's going to have to come in somewhere in that generating mix at less than 10 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So that's about a 4 or 5% year-on-year reduction, maybe just a little less than that. So there's a huge need to decarbonise. Nuclear's sitting there as a proven technology that's low carbon, but it's got to be affordable and it's got to be deliverable.
Of course.
So the different, the Model T Ford analogy ticks the boxes if you can prove it to be correct for the cost. Yeah?
Yep.
This thing, we estimate that this could drive us into a place where the cost of nuclear power is competitive with just about everything else that's available to us as an option. Yeah. And certainly needed in the mix. Yeah. In terms of the UK. So that's good. Yeah. That probably means there's going to be enough need to build enough units in the UK to demonstrate the benefits of a fleet approach and to warrant investing in the infrastructure, i.e. the factory builds that are needed to enable that. And that's an important point, because touching on your point around building a manufacturing infrastructure, this is about building a diverse supply chain and a series of factories that then come together on a project site. So you could almost think of this as four factories. Yeah. One is the primary components, the big heavy engineering in the center of the reactor. One is something around the construction modules. One is something around the instrumentation and control. And the fourth factory is actually the site build. Yeah.
Yes.
And one of the neat things about the site build is there's quite a lot of innovation in that as well, because most people, I guess, on the podcast could easily see a picture of the O2 Arena in London, or the dome that the New Orleans Saints play in the US. Imagine building a power station under a temporary roof, under a dome, and then the roof is collapsed because it's built to be collapsible. It's taken away and it's reused for the next build. So you're building inside a controlled environment.
Yep.
Which relative to, so you're still building in a factory, which relative to a big project site build, you know, saves you probably 30 or 40% of your build time. Yeah, in terms of efficiency. Yeah. So again, another cost driver. So that's there, not because it's neat, it's there because it ring fences and gets you protected from the environmental elements. But also what it does, it gives you a standard footprint. Therefore, your environmental assessment is always within the confines of your standard footprint. Yeah. Now you've got a product that you can deploy into many standard footprints. Yeah. And what you have to do is attune the foundations a little bit for the local seismic response or the local conditions. But that's it. And that's a relatively small variant. Everything else is factory build. Yeah.
Amazing.
So that drives the cost. So we hit the cost box. We've now got a dispersed supply chain in the UK. It's possible with the scale of the global market, and there are lots of estimates out there about how much power we're going to need and making these things affordable, that, you know, if you get up into, let's just say 10 or 20 units around the globe in addressable markets in sort of 20, 30 years, you could have a supply chain supplying, say, 40,000 jobs in the north of England, in the UK, on this. So one of the visions is we could become a global hub, i.e. the UK. One of my visions and part of my job is to initiate the UK being the global hub for small nuclear deployment, supply, build, regulation. And that's important because it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, and we're going to need a lot of this stuff to solve the world's problems. So it's not just about the UK SMR, it's about the UK SMR as a vehicle to develop a supply chain capability that can service and support other technologies. And this takes you into a glide path into advanced nuclear, molten salts, high-temp gas reactors, all the way up to fusion. Yeah?
Amazing.
So that's kind of the vision, which is no small one, I suppose. Good fun, though.
Rich Deakin, thank you so much for your time today. This is amazing hearing you lay out both your experience and your journey, what's led you to these conclusions, and just how simple and neat and logical, like, your presentation of the problem and your solution for it is. We all wish you the best of luck and can't wait to see you next.
Great, Bret. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. And hopefully there's one or two things in there that are useful to people that listen.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.